Hello again, my lovely little horrorlings. Gather round. Mama's got some more stories to tell you tonight. So, a few years back, I had gone out with some friends to the mountains for a camping trip. By camping, I mean everyone gets drunk around a fire in the middle of the woods and then passes out in their trucks. I was always the youngest friend in the group, and this took place before I had found a taste for mind-altering substances. I'm typically something of a skeptic, and if this had happened nowadays, I'd probably blame it on being drunk. But I was stone cold sober the whole time, which is why I feel so sure of what I saw. We're all out in the campsite, maybe 10 to 15 of us. I'm sitting on someone's tailgate, smoking a cigarette, when my friend, let's call him John, comes up to me, clearly intoxicated. John was the one I came out to the campsite with and was probably my closest friend out of everyone there. He asked me if I wanted to go on an adventure with him in the woods. I figured that if nothing else, I should probably go with him just to make sure that he didn't drunkenly fall over and hurt himself. Not to mention, even though I didn't drink back then, that didn't mean I was opposed to fun adventures in the forest. So we walked past the tree line that surrounded the campfire and out into the dense trees. The moon was out and it was a pretty clear night, so although it was dark, it wasn't pitch black. We came to a clearing that seemed to be made up of many flat-ish boulders and rocks. We were looking up at the night sky, and John was drunk talking. I was listening and nodding along with whatever nonsense he was saying. He sat down on one of the flatter rocks and eventually just laid down and passed out. I tried to jostle him awake, but he just kept mumbling for me to let him rest for a while. Since this is usually how John behaves when he's drinking, I complied and figured I'd head back to the campsite and check on him again in a little bit. So I go back, talk to a few people, smoke a few cigarettes. Then I decide it's time to go back and check on John. Maybe 10 minutes have passed. I'm walking back to the clearing where I left him, and already from afar I noticed that he wasn't in the spot that I left him. I keep figuring that he must have gotten up and wandered off somewhere. As I'm walking, I notice a shadow in the shape of a human standing behind a shrub of sorts, a few feet off to my right. I stop, figuring that it was John messing with me. Dude, come on, let's head back and get to camp. No response. And then the stereotypical, please, you're not scaring me. And still nothing. So I move closer to the shadow, and I notice that I can't make out any distinguishable features. No shirt logo, no eyes, or face for that matter, just a vacuum of black that stood in the shape of a human, hanging out with me in the forest. I backed away, putting it together that it was not John. I ran back to camp. I checked the truck that John and I had driven out there, and he was sleeping on the back bench seat. I did a quick head count, and everyone that I had recalled being at the camp was still there. The only thing that convinces me that this was paranormal was just the sheer absence of light that this thing had. It was just pure darkness. Whenever I tell this story, John always gets the chills, imagining that this thing was probably out there with him while he was passed out, all by himself. The general conclusion was that John had stumbled back while I had left him, and I just didn't notice that he had returned. Like I said, I'm a skeptic, so I always try and rationalize these things. But this is the one experience that I've had that I just can't believe was simply my eyes playing tricks on me. These experiences started occurring around early February this year. They started off small, with me experiencing an odd shadow-like person in my peripherals. Like, I'd turn my head and he would be standing there, motionless, and as soon as I'd turn my head back, he wouldn't be there anymore. At first I was of course confused and a little bit scared, but since these odd experiences started becoming regular, I had just sort of brushed it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. But there was one experience I had with the shadow man that proved to start off everything that has happened ever since. One night or late evening around February or early March, I was out with my girlfriend and her friend. We had a nice day, and then came time that they had to leave. We said our goodbyes and off they went. I was now alone, and I had to walk home in the dark. The long street I was walking on was dimly lit by a few street lights. Anyway, I was walking. Suddenly I felt the urge to look across the street, and what I saw truly shocked me. There was this girl dressed in early 1900s pyjamas standing under a streetlight. Honestly, that might sound like total bull, but I want you to stick with me here. Anyway, I had looked over and seen her just standing there, facing towards the floor, just looking down at the floor. I turned my head almost immediately and closed my eyes. As soon as I had built up the courage to open them back up again, she was gone. Around 20 minutes later, I had made my way home okay. I felt so relieved to be back home again. Later that night, I spoke to my auntie about what I had seen, as she was into the paranormal stuff and did a lot of research into the subject. Anyway, she took it on board and told me that I might have needed to wear some sort of necklace that had a crystal which protected you from spirits or something. I agreed, but I never got round to getting one. A few weeks passed on, and I once again started to experience this shadow man. He would always appear in my dreams in which I had been struggling or having arguments with my girlfriend or my parents. Just overall bad times. In these dreams, he would stand over the shoulder of the person I would have been arguing with, and when the argument had finished, he would disappear, and I would wake up in my bed in a pool of my own sweat. Sometimes I would wake up around 3 a.m. and have an overwhelming feeling of someone watching me. These experiences really messed up my head. I was having some pretty dark thoughts. About a week or two later, I was lying in bed and almost simultaneously, most, if not all of my clothes had been ripped out of my closet. It's worth mentioning that my closet was an open style closet. I was honestly really freaked out because I was almost at the point of trying to forget about the experiences I'd been going through. I was trying to move on with my life. This same night I had fallen asleep, but my mum was still awake. The morning after, my mum had asked me if I had been moving furniture around in my bedroom. I said no and asked why. Obviously, I was confused. She told me that she had heard some large heavy objects being moved in my bedroom. Yeah, freaky. Until the last few nights at the time that I'm writing this, nothing else had happened. That was until last Friday night. I experienced the one thing I did not want to experience in my life whatsoever. That thing was sleep paralysis. Honestly, I had never felt fear as strong and true as I did that night. I can barely even type it out. Anyway, here goes. So I was in my girlfriend's house and we were getting ready to go to sleep. We said our good nights and had kisses and all that stuff, and then we fell asleep. Everything went well until around 4 a.m. when I woke up on my side. I wasn't able to move. The only thing I could do was move my eyes, wiggle my toes, and breathe. I woke up once again confused and baffled as to what was going on until I started hearing loud footsteps coming up my girlfriend's stairs. Now, I can sit here and assure you that no one was awake at this time. Anyway, I looked at the door to my girlfriend's bedroom as I was closest to the door in the bed, and it creaked open. I was certain that we had closed it, as we always did before sleeping. Anyway, I got another overwhelming feeling of certainty and fear that this might well be my old friend, the Shadow Man. As he was getting to the top of the stairs, I started saying the Our Father prayer in my head for guidance and a bit of comfort and security, until he did indeed get to the top of the stairs. He stood in the doorframe and looked at me for what felt like an eternity until my girlfriend shook me out of the terrible episode I was having. When I say I was drenched in sweat, I mean it was like the Pacific Ocean in her bed. I was truly terrified. It never felt fear like it in my life. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll update again if anything else happens with this shadow man that seems to be haunting me. The town that I lived in had a tri-state tornado tear through it in 1925. I was told only 3 houses stood after the tornado passed. I've only been to one of these houses. It belonged to a buddy of mine at the time. I went over there a lot. This was when Guitar Hero was super popular and that's all we played. Now, his house was super creepy and I know it's haunted. I even had a cousin visit and sleep over there. And even he came home and asked if it was haunted. The reason being was, when you tried to sleep, you would hear angry whispering, like 2 or 3 people quietly. Now, add that in with the occasional banging on the stairs, scratches coming from the basement door, and dogs randomly getting scared out of a room or watching nothing, and you have a mess of scary stories to keep you spooked around a campfire. I'll share my experiences with that house later, but right now I want to focus on a different kind of fear. A fear I have never encountered again. My buddy, a mutual friend, and I were sleeping in my buddy's room. We never do this as the living room has a bigger TV, but after a night of shenanigans we ended up in his room. Our mutual friend was asleep on the bed, which is against the wall, while my buddy was at the foot of the bed playing Xbox and I was on the other side of the bed lying on my back. There is a mirror on the closet door that's right next to the TV, right across from me. I remember watching shadows from my buddy's game go back and forth, and then it stopped. The shadow, it stopped in the mirror. It looked like it was moving like a person, shaking its head. It was pitch black in that spot, and I was going to say something to my buddy, but before I could, this thing reached its hands out on either side of the mirror and pulled itself out. I watched as this thing crawled its way out of the mirror and crawled onto the ceiling directly over me. I couldn't see anything about it. It was pitch black and human-shaped. It stopped right over me, and it started getting bigger. It took me a while to realise it was getting closer to me. All I saw was this thing's head where its face should have been. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt a tear on my face. I knew I was going to die. All I saw was darkness. Then I heard a thump and a flip of the light switch. The light turned on and this thing was gone. I didn't even blink. It was just gone. I start hyperventilating. I start freaking out. I was crying harder than I ever had in my life. My buddy picked me up. He had flipped the light. He saw it, jumped over it. He saved me. I didn't put this together at the time because I was freaking out. He slapped me like 4 times. He told me, "You have to accept that we have answers to questions we are not allowed to ask. You have to live with this and never ask, why me? It's not that simple. Do you understand?" Of course I didn't. I'm not sure I do even now, but I'll never forget those words. The messed up part about all of this is that he lived in that house, and no matter what crazy ghost chasing, audio recording, weird sound stuff we experienced, he never showed any sign of being scared. But that night I realised, the messed up part about all of this is that he lived in that house. No matter what crazy ghost chasing, audio recording, weird sound stuff we experienced, he never showed signs of being scared. That night I realised, or at least I think I know, why. He must have gone through that stuff daily to the point where it just didn't faze him anymore. This experience ruined our friendship because I could not go back to his house. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't allowed to ask the only person who had answers after this experience. We lost touch after that. I ran with a different crowd, a bad crowd. I wanted to be friends again, but every time I looked at him, all I saw was that night. This experience absolutely ruined our friendship. I could not go back to his house. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't allowed to ask the only person who had any answers. We fell. This experience absolutely ruined our friendship. I couldn't go back to his house. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't allowed to ask the only person who had answers after this experience. We lost touch after that. I ran with a different crowd, and I wanted to be friends again, but every time I looked at him, all I could see was that night. You have to accept that we have answers to questions we are not allowed to ask. You have to live with this and never ask, why me? It's not that simple. Do you understand? Of course I didn't. I'm not sure I do even now, but I'll never forget those words. The messed up part about all of this is that he lived in that house. No matter what crazy ghost chasing, audio recording, weird sound stuff we experienced, he never showed signs of being scared. That night I realised, or at least I think I know, why. He must have gone through that stuff daily to the point where it just didn't faze him anymore. This experience ruined our friendship because I could not go back to his house. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't allowed to ask the only person who had answers after this experience. We lost touch after that. I ran with a different crowd and I wanted to be friends again, but every time I looked at him, all I could see was that night. Thank you for listening, my little horrorlings. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe and hit the notification bell to get news about new content and scare away any demons lurking in the shadows. Whatever you do, don't forget to check beneath your bed for monsters. Sweet dreams.